Now, if you remember, I already told you that there is a PMIism in cost budgeting, that is, padding is not an acceptable practice as per PMI. So, if padding is not allowed, where exactly are we taking care of the buffer? With any type of estimation, may it be cost estimation or time estimation, you need to have a buffer so that just in case something goes wrong, you have a buffer amount to cushion your estimation. So here comes the concept of reserve. Budget reserve analysis can establish both the contingency reserve and management reserve for the project. When we talk about a contingency reserve, we talk about a separately planned quantity used to allow for future situation which may be planned for only in part known unknowns. As part of risk management, we identify a few risks, and for the identified and qualified risks, we keep a reserve aside so that just in case that risk occurs, we can use the reserve in order to mitigate the risk. That reserve is called a contingency reserve. Contingency reserves are allowances for unplanned but potentially required changes that can result from realized risks identified in risk register. The contingency reserve can be percentage of estimated cost or fixed number or divided from quantitative analysis methods. Project manager have access to these funds. At one side, when contingency reserve talks about keeping aside a certain fund amount in order to mitigate the identified risks, on the other side, management reserve talks about keeping a fund separate for the risks which have not been identified. We need to understand, even if we go for a very extensive risk analysis, there are still chances that there are a few type of risks which we have not been able to identify. So, these risks which have not been identified as part of the risk registered and termed as unknown unknowns, we keep a separately planned quantity aside so that in case the unknown risks occur, we can use the reserve in order to mitigate that. Management reserves are budgets reserved for unplanned changes to project scope and cost, natural calamity like earthquake, flood, etc. And the project manager does not have access to these funds without management approval. So what we learned is when contingency reserve is within the access of the project manager and can be utilized at the discretion of the project manager in case the identified risks occur, the management reserve is only accessible to the higher management and they would be released to the project manager just in case a risk happens which was never identified within the risk register. If the concept of reserve is not very clear in your mind, it is still okay because we would talk about these two reserves in details as part of project risk management. The third process within project cost management is control cost. Control cost includes influencing the factors that create changes, ensuring that all change requests are acted on a timely manner, managing the actual changes when and as they occur, ensuring that cost expenditures do not exceed the authorized funding, monitoring cost performance to isolate and understand variance from approved cost baseline, monitoring work performance against funds expended, preventing unapproved changes, informing appropriate stakeholders of all approved changes, acting to bring expected cost overruns, etc. In short, you have a cost management plan which you created as part of the planning process group. Now, while your project is an execution process group, you are controlling cost as a project manager in order to ensure your cost budget is met as you planned. Now, having said that, it's probably very easy to understand the inputs, tools and techniques and outputs. We are sticking to the cost management plan that we created as part of the creation of project management plan. Hence, the project management plan is an obvious input to this process. The project funding requirements, work performance information, organizational process assets are other inputs to this process. Earned value management, forecasting, to complete performance index, performance reviews, variance analysis, and various project management softwares are used as tools and techniques. And the work performance measurement and budget forecasting are the major outputs of this process. We also get organizational process updates, change requests, project management plan updates, and other project document updates. The most important part of this process is the tools and techniques. We have been talking about earned value management technique and variance analysis, but now in this knowledge area we would learn about these two techniques in details. The earned value management technique uses three main components in order to analyze the project's performance. These three components are plan value, earned value, and actual cost. But first, let's have a look at what is earned value management all about. It's a commonly used method of performance measurement. It integrates project scope, cost, and schedule, the triple constraint of the project, and helps the project management team assess and measure project performance and progress. It is a project management technique that requires the information of an integrated baseline against which performance can be measured for the duration of the project. The principles of earned value management can be applied to all projects in any industry. That's the beauty of this technique. Earned value management develops and monitors three key dimensions as I was explaining. Let's try to understand the definition and calculation technique of these three different data points, that is plan value, actual cost, and earned value. And then it would be clear once we take up an example. Plan value is the authorized budget assigned to the work to be accomplished for an activity or work breakdown structure component. The total of plan value is sometimes referred to as the performance measurement baseline. The total plan value for the project is also known as budget at completion. That means how much the project is originally planned to cost. So let's say, as per my project management plan, a particular project is supposed to cost $5,000, so the plan value for the project would be $5,000. Earned value is the value of work performed expressed in terms of approved budget assigned to that work for an activity or work breakdown structure component. The earned value being measured must be related to plan value baseline, and the earned value measured cannot be greater than the authorized plan value budget for the component. For example, let's say a project of painting 10 square feet of area has been planned to cost $1,000. That means painting of each square feet is supposed to cost $100. So at the end of day 1, if I have completed painting of 2 square feet, my earned value would be 2 multiplied by $100, that is $200. The third data point in earned value management technique is actual cost. It is the total cost actually incurred and recorded in accomplishing the work performed for an activity or work breakdown structure component. Actual cost has to correspond in definition to whatever was budgeted for the planned value and measured in the earned value. So let's say, taking the same example, if at the end of day 1 I have completed 2 square feet of painting work and each square feet was actually planned to cost $100, my earned value was $200. However, let's say the total cost of painting that 2 square feet area has been $250, the actual cost would be $250. It might make sense to refer to the diagram at this point of time. However, the concept of actual cost, plan value, and earned value would be more clear when we look at an example. Now, having understood the concept of the earned value management technique, if we try to do a variance analysis based on earned value, plan value, and actual cost, we can easily calculate a schedule variance as well as the cost variance. The formula for schedule variance is earned value minus plan value. It helps to indicate if the project is falling behind its baseline schedule. If the schedule variance is positive, that is good for the project because it represents that the project is ahead of the schedule. On the other side, if the schedule variance is negative, it is bad for the project as it represents the project is behind the schedule. Similarly, cost variance is calculated as earned value minus actual cost. It indicates the relationship of physical performance to cost spent. A positive cost variance is good for the project as it indicates the project is under the budget. On the other side, a negative cost variance is bad for the project as it represents the project is over budget. Now, if you understood the concept of schedule variance and cost variance, you would also understand at the end of the project the schedule variance would be 0. How? I finished late but I still finish. That is, at the end of the project the total earned value would be same as the total planned value. If you think about the previous example I was giving, let's say 10 square feet of painting is originally planned to cost $1,000. That means the planned value for the project was $1,000. Now, I had originally planned the project to be completed within 5 days. However, it took me 7 days to complete painting 10 square feet area. But at the end of 7 days, even though I have finished 2 days late, the total earned value, that is, the worth of total work that I have completed, is still the same as the planned value. That means at the end of the project, earned value equals the planned value. In other words, the schedule variance becomes 0. Similarly, at the end of the project, cost variance becomes the difference between the budget at completion and the actual amount spent. Now, if variance talks about the difference between planned value and earned value, or planned value and actual cost, they can also be converted to efficiency indicators to reflect the cost and schedule performance of any project. Two different types of performance index used in project management are Schedule Performance Index (SPI) and Cost Performance Index (CPI). Schedule Performance Index, calculated as earned value divided by planned value, is a measure of progress achieved compared to project planned on a project. And Cost Performance Index (CPI), calculated as earned value divided by actual cost, is a measure of the value of work completed compared to actual cost or progress made on the project. Now, if you observe closely, you would be able to understand if the earned value is greater than planned value, that is, if SPI is greater than 1.0, it is good for the project because it represents that the project is ahead of the schedule. On the other side, if earned value is less than planned value, that means the actual work completed is less than what you had planned, Schedule Performance Index will be represented as less than 1, and that is bad for the project because it represents your project is behind the schedule. On a similar note, If earned value is less than actual cost, the CPI would come as greater than 1.0. That is good for your project because it represents your project is under budget. On the other side, if earned value is less than actual cost, that is, if CPI is less than 1.0, it represents your project is over budget. Now, if you have found those four formulas used in variance analysis and performance index analysis a bit confusing, here is a golden rule to remember those four formulas. If it is a variance, the formula is always EV minus something. If it is a performance index formula, the formula is always EV divided by something. If the formula relates to cost, like if we are calculating cost performance index or cost variance, we would use AC. That is, in case the formula is for cost variance, it would be EV minus AC, and if the formula is for cost performance index, it would be EV divided by AC. If the formula does not relate to cost and it relates to schedule, we would use PV. That means the formula for schedule variance would be EV minus PV, and schedule performance index would be represented as EV divided by PV. So, isn't it easy? You do not really need to memorize those formulas. Just remember these golden rules. Now, before we move ahead with an example, let's quickly look at a few more data points that we would require to calculate in order to find a project's performance. It is budget at completion, estimate at completion, variance at completion, and percent completion. Budget at completion, BAC, is the amount the job is supposed to cost, also called the total budget for your project. Estimate at completion, now that we are going at a different cost performance index, what do you expect the job to cost? Variance at completion, also called as VAC, is as simple as budget at completion minus estimate at completion. That means at the end of the project, what would be the variance in terms of cost? Percent completion is pretty simple. It is earned value divided by budget at completion. That means how much percentage of work you have already completed. Now, if you have found too many definitions to remember, just have a look at this particular slide. It explains plan value, earned value, actual cost, budget at completion, and estimate at completion in single sentences. It would be very useful for you to remember these key sentences as definitions of these 5 data points. Next, we would take up an example and we would try to learn the concept of earned value management technique through a numerical calculation.